When we look for the next head coach, it's going to be just more about the fit for the team, not necessarily fit for the scheme. So, it's going to be looking for, like I said, with Dirk, a lot of the qualities Dirk had. The positive qualities that Dirk had are rare. We're going to look for a great leader, a guy that's just a good fit for this organization and wants to be a Buc and is excited about coaching this young team and winning a championship.
That's Bucs General Manager Jason Licht talking about yet another coaching search for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've had way too many the last 10 years. Welcome to our podcast, A Few Extra Bucs, here on pewterpirates.com. I am Mike Neighbors. I'll be joined by our Bucs insider Roy Cummings and our voice of reason, producer Justin Thomas, in just a bit. First off, I'd like to thank our great title sponsors. They're going to stick with us in the new year, House of Brews, and, of course, Sea Dog Brewing Company. Great brews, great food, great service. Well, you heard Jason Licht kind of break it down. I'm going to bring in Justin Thomas. First of all, we're going to have a lot more from Jason Licht, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, we got a lot more.
Yeah, Jason Licht met the media this week to kind of talk about what happened with the Dirk Cutter firing and to look ahead and what he's looking for from a head coach. And we learned this about the coaching search. There's no timetable. They don't seem to be in a real hurry. Jason Licht says he's gotten a lot of texts, a lot of feedback on this job. We've heard the likes of Peter King saying it's one of the least desirable jobs in the NFL, but he kind of disputed that. And they're going to go outside the organization, meaning the Duffmeister, Mark Duffner, Todd Monken will not be the next head coach. So we know that, so that can kind of thin the pool a little bit. But I'm going to bring in Roy Cummings. Roy, what do you make of this search? I mean, as a reporter, you've covered a lot of these. Man, it's a 24/7 job following this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Things change pretty quickly, really. The Bucs wasting no time. Already have a couple of interviews in the bag, and lining up a few more. And of course, the rumors are flying everywhere. Of course, and that's going to happen. This is a time when you have to be careful about listening to all the rumors because you have agents out there trying to promote their coaches, trying to get their names out there. So they're gonna leak stuff that may not necessarily be 100% accurate. The teams are interested. So there's just a lot of information being thrown out there. You have to sift through it and make sure you're getting the right information. The interesting thing, though, is that I think we all know that probably in the next 2-3 weeks, we're going to have an answer on this thing. We'll see where it goes, but I think the Bucs are actually, my guess is that the pick ends up being someone that we don't hear a lot about. He's probably on the list, but when we hear about them interviewing Eric Bieniemy, for example, and Chris Richard and guys like that, that's something you want to pay attention to. But my guess is that that's really just kind of doing their due diligence on things. You have this opportunity to talk to people, you take advantage of it. My guess is their head coach is someone who we know very, very well and has probably been a head coach before. That's my guess.
Roy, there's a lot of ways this thing could go. You could get a retread coach like a Jack Del Rio, a Jim Caldwell. You could get a wild card guy like a Bill Cowher. You could get a college coach. You could get the hot coordinator. Are you leaning towards any kind of category for the Bucs head coach? New head coach?
I am. I like the experienced head coach who's been there and done it in the NFL. Look, the one difference there, I think, because I don't think Dabo Swinney's available. I don't think Nick Saban's available. I'd take a shot at Brian Kelly just because I think, he's been successful everywhere he's gone. He's consistently moved up the ladder from small college to mid-level college to big college and consistently won. I think he's learned along the way. I think a low-level NFL team, and let's face it, guys, that's what the Bucs are, would be next for him. He might have a little bit more control over maybe getting a little bit better job than that, but I wouldn't mind a Brian Kelly. But truly, I mean, my better judgment says that the best thing for the Buccaneers is someone who's been there and done it, a Mike McCarthy type, a Bruce Arians type. I really like the Jack Del Rio idea. I do like that a lot. I think a year away from the game sometimes gives you a different perspective on where the game is headed. I always thought that he got a raw deal in Oakland. So
no doubt.
Yeah, I would really be looking at Jack Del Rio. I think he's got the goods. So those are the guys I'd be looking at for sure.
Yeah, I think of all the guys that are the quote unquote retreads, Jack Del Rio. I mean, the job that he did in Jacksonville. I mean, look at of course they had the year last year, but they've had so many bad years, and he brought them a lot of good years there. And then Oakland, he kind of turned them around, but the Davis family's in love with John Gruden, so that wasn't a happy ending for him. So I wouldn't have a problem with that. Brian Kelly, I've seen some people say he's Shiano 2.0. I'm not buying that because he turned around more than one program. I mean, Shiano was just kind of Rutgers, and that was it. But I worry about Brian Kelly's temperament a little bit. We've kind of seen that over the years. I agree with you, though. At this juncture in the Bucs search, Roy, when they've had so many different head coaches in really the past 10 years, you need that proven guy right now. I don't think you can roll the dice on a college guy unless it's top tier, and it looks like those guys aren't going to be available. I love Bruce Arians. I mean, to me, Bruce Arians, if his health is okay, he checks all the boxes. I think he's a good blend of a guy who's going to have respect, but he's also a player's coach as well. He'll be great with the media. He'll be an engaging personality. I mean, I think I've said in one of our podcasts, I thought he would have been the perfect replacement for John Gruden on Monday Night Football. He's that charismatic. But the biggest thing for Bruce Arians, and the reason he's my number one choice, Roy, is he's that quarterback whisperer. I mean, he's helped Peyton Manning. He's helped Ben Roethlisberger. He's helped Andrew Luck, Carson Palmer. And if he can help those guys, he can certainly help Jameis Winston.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. My only concern about Bruce Arians is, and I don't mean the pun here, but, is his heart really in it? He's had some health issues. Yeah. He retired, willingly retired, said he was, he'd had enough of football a year ago. Maybe now he realizes he misses it. I've heard some other people argue that, he said a while back that the only job he was interested in was the Cleveland job. Well, I think he said that when the Cleveland job was the only job that was available. And I think Bruce Arians has enough respect for the coaching profession that he wouldn't openly say, I'm interested in a job in a city where a coach is still employed. I think he has too much respect for his brethren in the coaching industry to say that. So I think that's the reason he limited it at the time to Cleveland. And he's also said since that, he definitely listened to the Buccaneers. So, and I think he has, the fact that he does have a bit of a relationship, knows Jason Light, I think is a good thing. I've heard people say that's a bad thing. That, it's like bringing in your buddy, but I don't think that's the case. I agree with what you say. This is a guy who has really helped groom young quarterbacks, even older quarterbacks, turn some franchises around a little bit. I think he knows exactly how to deal with today's players despite his age, and I think he's a guy that there's no question I would be talking to him and seeing what his interest is, and he'd be in my finalist list no matter what.
And selfishly, from a media standpoint, I love the whole Bucco Bruce tie-in. Boy, the marketing department over at One Buck would love that, wouldn't they? I mean, they could have fun with that forever.
Oh, absolutely, they could, for sure.
Well, I'm with you on Mike McCarthy. I'm with you on Bruce Arians. I think you need that kind of guy in there, and I want an offensive guy too. You could bring a nice defensive coordinator in, but I don't want a defensive guy as a head coach. You have the pieces in place for this offense to be elite. We've talked about this on past podcasts. They were the number one passing offense for a reason, but I think coaching got in the way of not scoring a lot of points. You get the right coach in there with the offensive pieces. You get rid of the disaster that was Deshaun, and you get a lot of these guys healthier, like Cam Brate looks like he wasn't healthy. O.J. Howard, we know what Mike Evans can do. You re-sign Adam Humphries, you bring an offensive mind in there, and Roy, you get a running back. I think you get a proven guy. I don't care what Peter King says or a lot of these reports that we're hearing. I don't know why people don't jump at this job.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And again, I've said it before. I think Peter King is way off on this, and I think he's way off on this because he has no idea what's going on here in Tampa. He pays very little attention to it. I think the last time he paid any attention to Tampa was when Ryan Fitzpatrick was wearing Deshaun Jackson's sunglasses. He checked out after that, as did most people, and I understand that they did. But he just doesn't have a feel for what's going on here. My opinion is this is a much better team. I think this team is ready to contend for the playoffs. I think the talent is there. Yes, it needs to be tweaked. The roster needs to be tweaked. but I think it's very close, and it's one of the reasons that I believe that they should get a an experienced NFL head coach, an Arians type, a McCarthy type, a Jack Del Rio. And I'm not, the counter argument to that is, well, they didn't do that in Los Angeles with either the Rams or the Chargers, and you look at what's happened there, and both of those teams are flying. Well, and I would liken both of those teams really to kind of where the Bucs are now. But I also think that sometimes you catch lightning in a bottle. I don't know if that's the case in those two teams or not, but I just think there's a greater risk of getting it wrong when you go the coordinator route. Because again, guys, let's look at the 8 coaches who just got fired. They were all the previous coordinator types that were hot coordinators. One of them lasted a year. Dirk Cutter lasted 3. Most of them lasted about 2. Vance Joseph, Adam Gase. These were all guys that, 2, 3, 4 years ago, everybody was saying, well, that's the next, so-and-so, Sean McVay or whoever. And if you're going to go that route, I just think you have to be very, very patient. I think the Bucs are at a point where they don't need to be patient, really. I think they just need to kind of get somebody in here who can polish things off.
You know what I would love, and this will be impossible because this guy's probably going to get hired by somebody else, but you bring in a Bruce Arians, and then you have like an Adam Gase as your offensive coordinator, where if Arians just wants to coach for a couple of years, Gase can take over, and Gase can learn how to be a better head coach under Arians. Wouldn't that be great if they could do it? That's very unrealistic, though.
No, I don't think it is unrealistic, because I think that would be part of the game plan. If you're going to take Bruce Arians, I honestly think that would be your game plan, is that you would bring in some coordinator who you think is going to be potentially your next head coach. And it could be either a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator, someone who you hopefully see. He's not ready now, but you see, 2-3 years down the road, he's going to be a guy. Maybe he's a quarterback's coach right now. Maybe he's a receivers coach. Maybe he's a linebackers coach, something like that. Someone who's willing to wait his turn and learn the job from someone who's done it and been successful at it. I think that's a great idea. It's a little bit outside of the box, really, in terms of thinking, but gee, what's wrong with that?
Well, if it works, you heard it here first on A Few Extra Bucs. Just throwing it out there for Buck Nation right there. Okay, how about this, though? We've talked about this. I think, we've talked about Bruce Arians for a while when we knew Dirk Cutter obviously was on his way out this season. But I'm going to throw out Bill Cowher again. You're not hearing his name a lot, but I heard recently he's never left the door. He's always left the door open to return to coaching. I like a Bill Cowher. He's not the offensive guy, but boy, he would command immediate respect, give this franchise the respectability once again. I mean, I like the Bill Cowher wild card idea.
Yeah, I do too. Again, as I said at the top, my guess is that the Bucs head coach is someone you've heard of, but maybe haven't heard yet in the mix for this whole thing. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think, look, he's a guy that the Buccaneers have talked to in the past about coming out of retirement and being a coach for them. I believe it was after Raheem Morris, or while Raheem was on the hot seat, that those questions came up, and there was talk about Bill Cowher possibly being the next guy. So they do that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's a possibility. I really do. Again, would Bill Cowher be interested? He might. I just think that the Bucs are a great challenge. It's a great place to live. It's you have an organization that basically pretty much keeps where the owners keep their hands off of things as long as everything's going okay. And I think that's a positive. And you've got, again, I think you've got a roster that doesn't need it doesn't even need an overhaul. It needs tweaking, but it doesn't need an overhaul. And I think those are all attractive elements for the Buccaneers.
And when we're talking about coordinators, there's a couple names out there I'm really wary of. One is Josh McDaniels. The guy's never really proven it that he can do it on his own, and you never seen a Bill Belichick assistant really have a lot of success away from New England. And then Pete Carmichael in New Orleans, I don't know much about him, but I think he's a tad overrated. I know Sean Payton, boy, he has his hands all over that offense. Those are two guys sometimes you get all carried away while they're from New England, while they're from New Orleans. And I think that is not what this franchise – we agree on this. That's not where the franchise wants to go. But you see them as hot candidates right now around the league.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm with you 100%. I don't know your guy in New Orleans at all. What I know about Josh McDaniels, yeah, he had a shot at a time when he clearly wasn't ready. I think he got dealt a little bit of a bad hand in Denver, so I won't knock him for the results there. I won't say that he's really not ready. But what I didn't like is the game he played last year with Indianapolis, where he was going, then he wasn't going, and we've kind of seen it again with Matt Patricia in Detroit. Everybody was hot to get Josh McDaniels or Matt Patricia last year, and a less patient owner in Detroit probably would have fired Matt Patricia. Because let's face it, he failed this year as a head coach. He didn't elevate that team, in my opinion. So I'm not sure that coaches off the Belichick tree work. I don't mind coaches off the Andy Reid tree. They've been a little bit more successful. So guys like Eric Bieniemy, I can see what's going on there. I get it, but I also think Eric Bieniemy's I think it's a little bit early for him. My reason being that, it's been one really good season in Kansas City. I don't think a year ago anybody was screaming for Eric Bieniemy.
Yeah, so I think we're in agreement there that they need, a proven NFL coach, and we also agree that this is a good job. I think there's a lot of pieces in place, and especially with the NFL, you get a good draft, you get some free agents, and you can turn things around pretty quick. Jason Light said this week, this is why he thinks the job's attractive.
You start with ownership, who is letting us collectively do our jobs. You start with the facility. You can start also with the facilities. I think we have a young core group of talented players that, combined with, Dirk did some fantastic things offensively, historical season in some regards in a lot of categories.
A lot of praise for Dirk Cutter in that press conference. Didn't have anything bad to say about Dirk Cutter. Let me ask you this, though, Roy. Does Jason Light deserve to be back? Because to me, the glaring stat, and this is true, you can spin stats a lot of ways, but this is really a relevant stat. In his 5 years as Bucs general manager, he had a game less wins, one win fewer than Mark Dominic in his 5 years as Bucs general manager. And I thought Dominic had less resources. They didn't spend as much money with Mark Dominic. I was surprised, actually, they kept Jason Light. I thought the Glazers would clean house.
Well, one thing the Glazers need is someone who knows the landscape around the league, someone who knows who that up-and-coming coordinator is, someone who knows what head coach can turn this thing around. And that's Jason. That's part of Jason Light's job. No, he has not. The Bucs have not won consistently under him. Okay, I get it. But Jason Light didn't have much of a say early on in the first 2 years with Lovie Smith here. He's not the reason Anthony Collins was here. He's not the reason Michael Johnson was brought in at defensive end. Those were Lovie Smith calls. Lovie had more power at that point. He was pretty much making calling the shots. Jason Light was kind of an assistant in that. So I don't put a whole lot of the first 2 years of Jason Light's tenure here on Jason Light, because he was kind of learning on the job, so to speak. The last couple years, what's happened? Look, I think he picked the right quarterback. I'll start with that. I think he's done a tremendous job finding tight ends and wide receivers. I think he's done a very good job, for the most part, I believe, of finding offensive linemen. He's failed at finding running backs. I think he's done a damn good job of finding linebackers. He's failed at finding defensive linemen. And I think he's probably been, about okay at finding defensive backs. So more often than not, I think he finds players. He also finds players that are cheap. He finds those diamonds in the rough. Adam Humphries, for example, he finds him. Peyton Barber, who's a serviceable NFL back. He's found a lot of guys who have done a pretty good job just as undrafted free agents. His free agency work, again, even when Chris Baker was here, guys, even when he was signed, the feeling amongst all the Bucs fans was, yeah, good idea. Looks like we're going to play a little bit more 3-4 maybe, this, that, and the other. When players don't work out, big name or big money free agents, I should say, that's not always on the GM. And a general manager once told me that 90% of this game is played above the neck, and that's the one part you can't always figure out. You can look at tape and you can determine whether a player has the skill and ability to play positions. You can look at the measurables and does he match up to what your ideal is, or what you see as a defensive end, a running back, a lineman, whatever it may be. But you can't always predict what a player is going to think, how he's going to feel, how hard he's going to work once he gets the money. Those are the things that usually determine success for draft picks and free agents, no matter what. And that's how players are selected in this league. And when you can't predict 90%, the biggest part of it, 90% above the neck, when you can't predict that, you're always going to have there's always going to be a lot of room for error. So at the end of the day, Jason Licht primarily keeps his job because he's the only guy right now in the organization who has a feel for what's out there in terms of coaching candidates. That's why he's here. His role could change. He could be fired later on, depending on who the coach is. I don't think Jason Licht is solid. Yes, he's got a contract through 2019, but at the end of the day, the people want to be critical of Jason Licht. Look a little bit deeper, and you can see where he may be one of the few reasons that they've actually had some success with at least some of the players that they've brought in.
Wow, that's solid defense for Jason Licht. You made me kind of rethink things, especially early on with Levy calling a lot of the shots. But it's amazing to me you have a lame duck general manager next year and you have a lame duck quarterback. If Jameis Winston has a big year, then Jason Licht will be back because he drafted Jameis Winston, and likely that will reverse the Bucs' fortunes. Here's what Jason Licht had to say about Jameis Winston's status next year.
Jameis Winston will be here. We have him under contract for a year. He has done some amazing things for a young 24, turns 25 in a week. Quarterback has accomplished more than most of the elite quarterbacks have at his age throughout that career, that time span. There's a lot to like about Jameis. Jameis will be here next year.
I don't know if there's a lot to like about Jameis. There's some to like about Jameis Winston, but I think we both agree on this, Roy. Say what you want about Jameis Winston, and I think from afar, it's easier to criticize him if you don't really know the situation here in Tampa. I think the bottom line with Jameis Winston is, Roy, they've invested way too much in Jameis Winston to cut him loose right now and see him shine somewhere else.
I totally agree, 100%. No doubt about it. You've invested a first overall draft pick. Has he gotten you to the playoffs yet? No. Has he won? Has he won more than he's lost? No. Is it all his fault? Absolutely not. Look, Jameis Winston right now stands at number 9 on the all-time list for passing yards by players in their first 4 years in the NFL. From his rookie season to his fourth season, he also ranks 9th of all time in touchdown passes thrown. NFL history, most single-season net passing yards. It's the Buccaneers this year at 5,125. That's Jameis Winston. Most points, 396 in team history. That's got a lot to do with Jameis Winston. When Jason Licht says he's done a lot of great things, he has. He really has, and he's gotten better every year. And the incident that turned everybody off going into this season happened 3 years ago. Now, if there's a skeleton in the closet that we don't know about, everything changes, and I understand that. But right now, it's way too soon to give up on Jameis Winston. Way too soon, because tell me the quarterback who's available who's better. That's my argument. Show me the quarterback who's available who's better. My counter argument, no matter who you say, is whether it's Nick Foles as a free agent or Teddy Bridgewater, which I laugh out loud at, or Dwayne Haskins or whoever the the young quarterback coming out of the draft is, I just say, I'm sorry. No, you're absolutely wrong, because Jameis Winston has probably done more than every one of those, except for Foles, who, I don't think he's going to go to a place where, why would he come to the Buccaneers if he's got an opportunity to go almost anywhere? So we'll see how that works out. But no, you've got to hold on to Jameis Winston at this point.
I think Jameis Winston is lucky timing-wise because this is a weak draft for quarterbacks coming out of college. It's a weak draft free agent-wise. I mean, you broke down some of those names from Bridgewater to Foles. Joe Flacco's past his prime. Haskins is intriguing, though, but the Bucs don't want to start over at quarterback. So Jameis Winston, I think, would you agree with me, Roy? You and I disagree on Winston in some aspects, but I think he is fortunate in terms of his timing in his lame duck year because of the situation in the draft, because of the situation with veteran quarterbacks right now.
Yeah, a little bit. It's hard to argue with that. I mean, if there was a big standout quarterback, or two that everybody loved and knew was coming out this year, maybe there would be talk about that. But here's the thing. The Buccaneers have a quarterback, okay? And there's nothing to suggest that Haskins is going to be better or anyone else in college is going to be better. And there's nothing to suggest really that Nick Foles over the course of 16 games is going to be all that much better. Jameis Winston has done a lot of very, very good things, continues to get better every year. I'd like to see what he does with a new coach, see if he can learn some more, continue to progress. And one of my biggest reasons for not letting Jameis Winston go is if you let Jameis Winston go, a team that's tight up against the salary cap, or going to probably be tight against the salary cap, because it's got a lot of young players that it has to re-sign, suddenly has to go out and buy a quarterback. You know what you're going to pay Jameis Winston. You may have to overpay for that quarterback, or you may end up drafting a guy, and actually this team needs more pieces at other places. You've got a quarterback you can win with. You've got a quarterback who basically helped guide your offense as one of the best offense in franchise history, one of the best offenses in the NFL this season. And you need pieces on defense, on the offensive line, at running back. You need pieces other than the quarterback. And so all this talk about, what the Bucs ought to do is, draft, trade down and draft a quarterback with the first round pick. Absolutely not. You've got quarterbacks. You can still re-sign Ryan Fitzpatrick. You've got Ryan Griffin, who a lot of people want to see. We'll see what the new coach thinks. But at the end of the day, you don't need a quarterback right now as badly as you need possibly another linebacker, another defensive lineman, certainly a cornerback or a safety, certainly a running back. Those are the things you need the most on this football team right now, not a quarterback.
Yeah, I want to see Jameis with a good running back and a good offensive line and a better decision-making because he's been in the league 4 years. I think all of that will make for a better Jameis Winston. But you know what makes us better? Justin, you know what time it is. Three and out, baby. 3 and out, our first one of 2019. Happy New Year, everybody, by the way. This is kind of a doom and gloom podcast in Buccaneer. Head coaches and should the G
doom and gloom season.
Is Jameis Winston, blah, 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 blah. But didn't even say Happy New Year off the top. I feel like a loser, guys. I know we're a little 3 days into January, but it's 3 and out. We have 3 questions and we're out of here. I've kind of shuffled the deck a little bit. But I want you to rank these, and we're always going to have Justin go first because that's kind of the way we switch things up during the season. In terms of these head coaches and the hirings for the Buccaneers, Roy will probably like this, hopefully. I want you to name from worst to first. You have Raheem Morris, you have Greg Schiano, you have Lovie Smith, you have Dirk Cutter. Give me the worst hiring to the best of those guys.
Of those guys?
Yeah. Yes. Raheem, Schiano, Lovie, Cutter.
I think I would do Schiano, Raheem, Lovie, and then Cutter.
Okay. So Cutter wins.
Yeah.
He's the best of the worst.
yeah, I guess that's a good way of putting it. He's the best of the worst.
Okay. Well, you covered all these. How do you rank the 4 from worst to first?
Raheem was the worst because he'd never been a head coach.
Yeah.
He'd never even been a coordinator. I would say that actually Dirk Cutter would be next
Wow.
Because and it has nothing to do with Dirk Cutter's performance. It's because just like with Raheem, the reason he was hired to be the head coach was because the Bucs were afraid to lose him to another team that was going to make him either a head coach or a coordinator, and he wasn't that hot. It was the Glazers' inability to read the NFL, the landscape, that led to the hiring of Raheem Morris as a head coach, which came way too soon. He wasn't ready, and Dirk Cutter as a head coach, which came too soon because it's not what he is. Then I would have Greg Schiano just because, again, they failed to read the landscape well enough and didn't know that he's not an NFL head coach. He is a college coach. And I would have Lovey as the first because he'd done it. He'd done it for years. Most people in Chicago thought that he got a bad rap in Chicago, and the team was being torn apart by a bad general manager and shaky ownership. He was a legitimate NFL head coach, and I think the Bucs actually they gave him a little bit too much power, but I think they cut him loose too soon. I think in time he probably would have gotten this thing straightened out, but it takes time. You can't just give a guy 2 years and expect things to be turned around, especially when you try to rebuild your team through free agency. That's not how you build a football team in the NFL. You build it through the draft.
Justin, now I know how you feel because I had one list in mind, and Roy kind of changed my mind a little bit.
He's good at that.
That's what Roy does. That's what you do, Roy. I think there's no doubt Raheem was the worst. And I remember watching Raheem's opening press conference, just feeling sorry for him. Like, this guy's not ready for this. He's not ready for this at all. And, of course, he has one winning season, though, more than Lovey can say. I actually liked the Greg Schiano hiring. I thought, the guy can turn around Rutgers. He's been around guys like Butch Davis at Miami. I thought maybe he didn't get enough time. And I always think it all comes down to quarterback, Roy. You don't have a quarterback in this league, you're done very quickly. If Sean Payton doesn't have Drew Brees and he goes to Miami and he has to draft Vince Young or Matt Leinart instead of Reggie Bush, who knows where Sean Payton would be today. So it's kind of crazy how life turns out for some of these coaches. But I got to go Raheem. I got to go Schiano. Then I go Dirk Cutter. I actually like Dirk Cutter quite a bit. I will say this is separate from football, but Dirk Cutter's daughter put out a tweet this week, and it was really heartfelt about how much she loved her father, just paraphrasing, and how tough it is for families to go through this. And I'm not going to feel sorry for Dirk Cutter, all the money he's made, but I think people kind of forget that human element sometimes. But I kind of like Dirk Cutter the best out of all those guys covering him from a person standpoint, but he just couldn't get it done. He had a lot of weapons and had a lot of chances down the stretch to turn things around. I think the decision was made a long time ago. But I was going to go Lovey and then Dirk, but you changed my mind because, Lovey, you know what? He almost won a Super Bowl in Chicago with Rex Grossman and came here with, it's hard to kind of turn things around based on the talent that he had, made some bad personnel moves, but I'm going to agree with you on that. I think Lovey Smith is the best of the worst. All right, question number 2 in our 3 and out. Who do you want here more next season? Who is more important to be here, Gerald McCoy or Adam Humphries?
Wow.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think we've discussed this before, but I think you try and trade Gerald McCoy and see if you can get something for him. So with that being, I think, a pretty smart move, I would say Adam Humphries.
What do you think, Roy?
Yeah, I'm definitely Adam Humphries. And look, I am a big Gerald McCoy fan. I believe Gerald McCoy's name belongs on the Ring of Honor at the end of the day. I think he was one of the best. He played up to his draft status. He did. It's unfortunate the Bucs could never surround him with better players. I think the biggest reason I take Adam Humphries still has upside. He's on the rise. Hasn't even come close to maxing out on his potential or hitting his prime yet. Whereas I think Gerald McCoy is already on the downside. He's reached his prime. He's played his best football. And I still think he's got years left, maybe 2, 3, 4. And I still think he could, I would still want him on my team, no doubt about it. But if I have to pick one over the other, I'm taking Adam Humphries because he's just got more upside at this point. And I think that's what's important.
You know what? I couldn't agree more with Adam Humphries. I think Jason Light has a lot of things going, not a lot, but he has definitely some acquisitions that are in his favor. And Adam Humphries is up there, so he's not going to let go of that guy. He discovered him. They've groomed him. It's almost like Jameis, where they've invested so much in him, they're not going to let him go and play with somebody else. And Gerald McCoy, to me, I don't know. You know, we've talked about his leadership. I think he needs to go somewhere else. I think he needs to go. And and I agree with Justin. If they could get anything for Gerald McCoy, it would be a double whammy. I think his time has passed in Tampa. It's time for him to go. And maybe it's a win-win. He'd be better off in a team that could possibly make the playoffs, and the Bucs could move on and groom some young players at that position like Vita Vea. All right, my last question, the 3 and out. I said Happy New Year. It's 2019. Man, it's crazy to say that. And I didn't brief you guys on this. I'm not going to ask you your New Year's resolutions. All right. I want a bold prediction in the NFL for 2019. Something that may surprise somebody. What do you think, Justin?
You need to stall longer, Mike. I need some time to think about one. Are we talking about the next season, not like this upcoming playoffs?
What's going to happen next year? That's maybe it could be a surprise team. It could be a surprise player. It could be a surprise coaching hire. It could be something that maybe nobody expects or nobody's talking about right now. That would be kind of that splash news headline.
I could see. Who's the QB in Buffalo? Is it Josh Allen? I always get him.
Yes.
That's what I thought. I could see him taking a big step forward. I'm not saying Buffalo's going to turn it around and become a surprise team, but I think they have a pretty good QB. He played a hell of a game his last game of the regular season. I think Buffalo could take a big step forward. I'm not saying they're going to all of a sudden become a playoff team, but I kind of like what's going there. So I'll pick that as a real quick off the top of my head.
All right. I didn't brief you on this. They made the playoffs, last season.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they have some good pieces. I think it's similar to Bucs. If they make some tweaks, they could be a pretty good team.
Well, you had the advantage of thinking about this for a little bit.
Yeah, but I had an idea right off the top of my head. Bill Belichick retires.
Really?
Yeah, I think he's going to.
Is this after the Patriots win a Super Bowl?
Win or lose, I think he retires after this year. It may not come until March, but I think he calls it quits. Says, you know what, I'm good.
Regardless if Brady wants to keep playing or
right,
not.
Exactly. I think he says, you know what, I've had it. I'm done.
That's a super hot take right there.
Well, it's funny you say that because my hot take is that in 2019 we're going to see the last of not only Tom Brady, we're going to see the last of Drew Brees, and we're going to appreciate those guys because we may not see two guys of that caliber retire in 1 year for a long, long time, if ever. I mean, those guys, after they put up their stats next year, are going to be at the top or hold almost every significant quarterback record. I know how the league is. You got the Patrick Mahomes and you got, Carson Wentz and Jared Goff and all these young bucks coming up. But I think we're going to really appreciate the likes of Tom Brady and Drew Brees, especially when they're gone.
I think you're right. I'd like to see it.
But if the Saints win the Super Bowl, Drew Brees told me a couple weeks ago that he still has more football in him left. I think if the Saints win the Super Bowl, he'd be very tempted to leave on top. Because you know what? You can't predict stuff like that. You can talk about it, but when it happens, I think he'd be mighty tempted, even though he's got another year left on his deal, and that's a young football team. I wouldn't be surprised if he retired. But we will see. All right, guys, appreciate it. Happy New Year once again. Before we go, though, we're gonna get our PewterPirates.com poll more involved in 2019, and we're gonna go back to a poll we had a few weeks ago, I guess. Justin, give me an update on this poll because it's really relevant now.
Yeah, it really is. A couple of weeks ago, we ran a poll. If you ran the Bucs organization, what would be your first off-season move? Obviously, we know what wound up happening, but up until this point, everyone got to vote. No one, surprisingly, picked to shore up the O-line or to only fire Jason Licht. However, 15% about decided they thought trading Gerald McCoy for draft picks would be a good idea. We talked about that previously. 23% thought they should only fire Dirk Cutter. That's obviously what wound up happening. And then 47%, this is the most, they all picked to fire both Cutter and Jason Light. Surprisingly and funnily enough, 15% thought praying would be the best option. So there you go.
Hard to argue against that. Roy, just your final comments on that, because I know you could make a case to defend Dirk Cutter, and we've done that, and Jason Light, but I thought they'd clean house, but you made a good case about Jason Light. Does that poll surprise you at all?
Not really. I know how fans feel. So no, I'm not surprised. It actually kind of makes some sense. I think people were ready to move on, and so no, I'm not surprised. I think it kind of went the way I expected it to, actually.
We have smart listeners here on pewterpirates.com. Well, listen, that's going to wrap things up. We're going to keep you covered during this coaching search. We'll be with you at least once a week throughout the offseason for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, throughout free agency, throughout the draft process and the NFL draft, and then the offseason will be here before we know it. But keep it logged here at pewterpirates.com for our A Few Extra Bucks podcasts, our video updates. Subscribe today. It's free. Well, we'd like to thank our title sponsors, House of Brews and Lutz on the corner of Northdale, Mabry, and Van Dyke, and Sea Dog Brewing Company, 2 great locations in Clearwater and Treasure Island on the beach. Great brews, great food, great service. Until next time, I am Mike Neighbors. Thanks for logging on to A Few Extra Bucks here on pewterpirates.com.